Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to journey through the fascinating world of global trade,
Oh, yeah.
but specifically focusing on those often overlooked taxes called tariffs.
Interesting.
We're going to uncover how a country's economic growth can actually tip the scales when it comes to setting these tariffs.
Okay.
It's kind of like a global game of economic chess. We're
Right.
about to break down the strategies.
Absolutely. The global trade landscape is constantly shifting, and a country's economic clout plays a huge role in determining how these tariffs are set.
Now, our guide for this deep dive is a research paper published by the International Monetary Fund back in January 2023.
Uh-huh.
It's titled Trade Policy Implications of a Changing World, Tariffs and Import Market Power.
Okay.
And, it might sound a bit technical at first glance,
Yeah.
but trust me, the insights are anything but boring.
This paper really explores a world where countries are constantly at the negotiating table, adjusting trade deals based on their purchasing power.
I'm already intrigued. So let's start with a concept that's central to all of this. Terms of trade.
Okay.
Imagine you're the only bakery in a small town.
Okay.
Everyone relies on you for their daily bread, giving you a lot of leverage.
Right.
You could even say you have market power because you're providing something everyone needs.
That's a great analogy. And just like that, bakery countries with a large share of imports for a specific product can wield considerable influence.
Okay.
Let's say a nation buys a massive 70% of the world's soybeans.
Wow.
That gives them serious bargaining power.
So they could essentially say, we're buying so much of your soybeans that you better give us a good price,
Yeah.
or we'll slap tariffs on them, making it pricier for everyone.
Precisely, they could use tariffs,
Yeah.
which are essentially import taxes to tilt the playing field in their favor.
Uh-huh.
While this benefits the importing country, it can also create tension and even spark trade wars if other countries feel disadvantaged.
So that's where the World Trade Organization, the WTO, steps in, right?
Hmm.
Like a referee trying to keep things fair and prevent all-out trade wars.
Exactly. The WTO encourages countries to agree on tariffs and uphold those agreements, creating a more predictable and stable environment for global trade.
Okay.
This predictability reduces uncertainty and encourages countries to specialize in what they do best, ideally leading to greater efficiency and benefits for everyone involved.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the paper raises a critical question.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when a country's economic power drastically changes after it's already agreed to these trade rules? What if a country suddenly becomes a major importer of something it barely traded before?
That's where things get really interesting. The global trade scene is dynamic and ever-changing.
Right.
Economies evolve, countries grow, and those shifts can reshape global trade patterns in a big way. This paper dives into some really fascinating examples of this.
Oh, I love a good real-world example.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more.
We'll take Brazil, for instance. As their agricultural sector boomed, so did their need for fertilizers. They went from a minor player to a major importer in the fertilizer market, wielding much more influence than they had before.
So their economic growth translated into greater leverage in the global fertilizer trade? That's fascinating. What other examples did the researchers highlight?
Another compelling example is China. Their demand for soybeans exploded as their economy grew, going from importing a tiny 5% of the world's soybeans to a staggering 70%. That's a massive shift in market power with huge implications for the global soybean market. And we've seen similar trends with Vietnam and their growing demand for maize as their economy takes off.
It sounds like some countries' economic growth is really shaking things up in global trade, but does this mean every country is just importing more and more?
Not necessarily. Some countries actually become less reliant on imports as they develop their own industries. Take China again. They used to import a lot of railway coaches, but as they ramped up their own manufacturing capabilities, their need for imports in that sector shrank considerably.
So we have this dynamic system where some countries are importing more as their economies grow, while others are becoming more self-sufficient. What does this mean for the WTO and their mission to keep trade fair?
That's the million-dollar question, and the researchers took a unique approach to tackling it. They looked at data from before the WTO even existed and compared it to the current trade landscape.
I'm on the edge of my seat here. What did they discover?
They found something pretty remarkable. If countries renegotiated their tariff agreements today based on their current economic clout, it could potentially slash global tariff costs by a whopping $26.4 billion.
Right. $26.4 billion. That's an astronomical amount. That's got to have some major implications, right?
You're absolutely right. To put that number into perspective, it represents almost 10% of all tariffs paid globally. That's a potential game changer for the global economy. And it suggests that the current system designed decades ago might need a serious update to keep pace with these shifting economic powers.
Wow, this is already mind-blowing. So what does this mean for the future of global trade? Will countries actually be willing to renegotiate these agreements?
We'll dive into those questions next.
Okay, so we've established that this potential $26.4 billion reduction in global tariff costs is huge. But is it even realistic to think that countries would willingly give up their hard-won advantages in trade? After all, no one wants to lose outright.
It's definitely a valid concern. Change is never easy, especially when it involves something as complex and impactful as global trade. Renegotiating every single tariff agreement would be a logistical nightmare, not to mention politically challenging. The paper actually suggests that the WTO might need to consider more frequent or even sector-specific negotiations to adapt to these power shifts.
So instead of trying to overhaul the entire system at once, they could focus on areas where the power dynamics have shifted the most, kind of like a more targeted and strategic approach.
Exactly. Focusing on specific sectors where these power shifts are most prominent could be a more practical way forward. Think of it this way. Instead of rewriting the entire rulebook of global trade countries, would come together to revise, say, just the chapter on agricultural products or maybe the section on manufactured goods.
That makes sense. A more focused approach seems like it would be easier to manage and potentially less contentious.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it still be incredibly complex to get everyone on board with these sector-specific changes?
Without a doubt, it would still be a complex process. However, the potential benefits, as this research suggests, could be substantial. We're talking about a potential $26.4 billion reduction in global tariff costs. Think about what that could mean for you. Increased trade could lead to lower prices on everyday goods, from the clothes you wear to the electronics you use.
So this isn't just some abstract economic theory. It could actually impact the prices we see in stores.
Absolutely. And on a global scale, that kind of reduction could have a ripple effect, stimulating economic growth and potentially even creating new jobs.
Okay, I'm starting to see how significant this could be. But let's not forget that trade is inherently competitive. There will inevitably be winners and losers in any kind of renegotiation, right?
That's true. Some countries might be hesitant to give up advantages they currently hold. This is why the WTO would need to play a delicate balancing act, finding ways to accommodate the interests of all its members, while also acknowledging the need for the system to evolve.
It sounds like a monumental task. How could they possibly navigate all those competing interests?
Well, the paper dives into the potential impact on specific countries and sectors. For developing countries that joined the WTO after the Uruguay, round the sectors with the biggest potential for tariff reductions are agriculture and manufactured goods. Think things like oilseeds, meats, cereals, vehicles, and machinery.
Wow, that's a pretty diverse range of products. It sounds like these potential changes could reach far beyond just a few niche industries.
Precisely. And the potential reductions are significant. For some products, they could be as high as 18.5 percentage points. Imagine the impact that could have on those industries and the countries that produce them.
Those are some pretty big numbers. What kind of ripple effects could we see from those kinds of reductions?
It's hard to predict with absolute certainty, but it's clear that reductions of that magnitude could significantly impact global trade flows, production levels, and ultimately prices for consumers around the world.
So this really could be a game changer for the global economy. Now, you mentioned earlier this idea of a sectoral approach to negotiations. Can you unpack that a bit more? What would that look like in practice?
Instead of trying to tackle all tariff grants at once, the WTO could opt for a more focused approach, addressing specific sectors where those power dynamics have shifted most dramatically. For example, they could have a round of negotiations dedicated solely to agricultural products, or another round focused on manufactured goods.
So it's kind of like breaking down a massive complex problem into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Exactly. A more targeted approach could be easier to manage both logistically and politically. It might even make it easier for countries to find common ground and avoid those broader trade wars that can disrupt the global economy.
This all sounds promising. But wouldn't those sector-specific negotiations still be incredibly complex?
Of course, there would still be complexities, but the potential benefits outlined in the research, such as that massive $26.4 billion reduction in global tariff costs, are certainly worth considering. Increased trade, lower prices for consumers, and a boost to the global economy are all compelling reasons to at least explore these ideas further.
Yeah, I see your point. That potential reduction in tariff costs is a powerful motivator. But wouldn't some countries be resistant to the idea of renegotiating? I mean, they might worry about, losing the upper hand in certain sectors.
It's true. There will always be push and pull when it comes to global trade. The WTO would have to carefully consider the interests of all its members. After all, that's the whole point of the organization, to foster cooperation and find solutions that benefit as many countries as possible. It's a delicate balancing act.
So it sounds like the WTO would need to be quite the diplomat to navigate these, potentially choppy waters.
Diplomacy is certainly key. The WTO would need to ensure fairness and transparency throughout the process, helping countries understand the potential benefits of a more adaptable trading system. Remember, this isn't about creating winners and losers. It's about acknowledging that global economic power is constantly in flux, and the rules of the game need to reflect that reality.
So it's less about punishing countries that are doing well and more about creating a system that can evolve along with the global economy.
That's a great way to put it. The current system designed decades ago might not be equipped to handle the complexities of today's interconnected and rapidly evolving global marketplace.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. I had no idea that something as seemingly dry as tariffs could be so central to the forces shaping our world.
It's a reminder that economics isn't just about abstract theories and numbers on a page. It's about real-world impacts, power dynamics, and the constant interplay between cooperation and competition on a global scale.
And it leaves us with some big questions to ponder, doesn't it? Will countries be willing to embrace these changes and work together to create a more equitable and efficient trading system? Or will we see a rise in protectionist measures and trade conflicts as nations try to cling to their current advantages?
Those are the questions we all need to be talking about. And as technology continues to reshape the global economy, things will only get more complex. Digital trade is on the rise, and the WTO might need to consider even more radical revisions to its rulebook to keep pace with these advancements.
Wow, it sounds like the future of global trade is going to be a wild ride.
It certainly will be. And as we've seen today, understanding the underlying dynamics of global trade is more important than ever.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of tariffs and global trade. We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully you've gained some valuable insights into the complexities and possibilities that lie ahead.
It's a constantly evolving landscape full of challenges and opportunities. And as we've explored today, understanding these dynamics is essential for navigating the future.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, stay curious about the forces that shape our world. Until next time, happy exploring.